C.S. Lewis and the Purpose of Loneliness. There are moments in life when the silence becomes unbearable. You reach for someone's hand, and no one's there. You open your heart to share, and there's no answer. You walk through crowded streets or sit in a noisy room, and still feel like you are invisible. This is the kind of loneliness that doesn't just touch the skin, it pierces the soul. It's not just about being alone, it's about feeling abandoned, forgotten, misunderstood. And it's in these moments that a terrifying question rises from deep within. What if this emptiness means I'm unlovable? What if there is no one out there, human or divine, who truly sees me? C.S. Lewis knew this ache well. Before he was the great defender of faith, he was a man haunted by silence. He lost his mother at a young age, endured the coldness of boarding schools, and drifted through a season of spiritual cynicism where God, if he existed at all, felt distant and absurd. He described those early years as a dry desert, a place where the soul thirsts but finds no water. Yet it was precisely in that emptiness that something began to stir. Not a voice, not a miracle, but a longing so deep, so impossible to ignore that Lewis began to suspect it had a source beyond this world. That longing, what he would later call joy, was a homesickness for something eternal, a loneliness that didn't disprove the presence of God, but pointed straight to it. Because if you feel abandoned, it means you expected someone to be there. If you ache for meaning, it means you were made for more than numbness. And if you hunger for love that never leaves, it might be because that love exists. But before that realization came to Lewis, he had to pass through the valley of silence, the long nights where prayers go unanswered, the inner world that feels echoingly empty. He once wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience but shouts in our pain. And loneliness, raw, aching loneliness, is often the loudest pain of all. And maybe, just maybe, that pain isn't pointless. What if loneliness is not a sign that something's wrong with you, but that something important is happening within you? What if the ache is not a punishment, but a preparation? When everything external is stripped away, relationships, distractions, noise, we are left face to face with ourselves. And that's terrifying, because in the silence, all the voices you've buried come alive. The old wounds, the insecurities, the fears you thought you had outgrown. And yet it's in that very silence that truth can finally speak, without the filters, without the masks, without the noise. Lewis understood that God often chooses to speak through what he withholds. He withholds easy answers, so we seek deeper ones. He withholds immediate comfort, so we reach for lasting peace. He allows the loneliness, not to destroy us, but to deconstruct the idols we didn't even know we had. The idol of self-sufficiency, the idol of being liked, the idol of control, the idol of constant connection. In a culture that celebrates distraction, loneliness is a kind of rebellion. It forces us to stop scrolling, stop performing, stop pretending. It pushes us into a deeper honesty about who we are and what we truly need. And perhaps the most painful truth of all is this: we need God. Not the idea of God, not a theology, but the actual presence of a living God who enters our loneliness not with explanations, but with companionship. Lewis's conversion did not remove his loneliness, but it transformed it. The ache remained, but now it had meaning. Now it pointed somewhere. It became the echo of a distant country, a reminder that this world is not our home. He wrote, "If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world." Loneliness, then, is not your enemy. It is your homing signal. The pain is real, but so is the promise. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are being called, through the ache, through the silence, through the solitude, into a deeper knowing, not just of yourself, but of the one who shaped your soul. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore how modern culture tries to solve loneliness with shallow connections, and how the wisdom of C.S. Lewis invites us into something far richer, far riskier, and far more healing: communion. C.S. Lewis and the Purpose of Loneliness. We live in the most connected era in human history. and perhaps the loneliest. With a single tap, you can speak to someone across the globe. You can scroll through photos of happy faces, curated lives, clever captions. And yet behind the screen, behind the smile, behind the perfectly lit image, how many hearts are quietly breaking? How many are aching not for attention, but for understanding? The modern solution to loneliness is noise. Fill the silence, binge a show, check your notifications. Buy something new, keep moving, keep talking, keep smiling, but none of it reaches the soul. It may distract, but it doesn't heal. It may entertain, but it doesn't transform. The more we numb, the deeper the ache becomes. And at some point we start to wonder, is something wrong with me? Why does nothing satisfy? C.S. Lewis saw this coming long before the rise of smartphones or social media. He wrote that we are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. In other words, we settle for substitutes. We chase stimulation when our souls are starving for substance. We build networks instead of relationships. We seek comfort instead of truth. And the problem isn't the technology itself. It's what it teaches us about ourselves. It teaches us that we are the center of our world, that we can design our identity, edit our pain, and filter our need. It teaches us that connection is a product we consume, not a presence we cultivate. And in that process, we begin to lose something sacred: communion. Communion is not convenience. It's not easy, it's not fast. It doesn't happen in 280 characters or 5-second clips. Communion requires slowness, stillness, vulnerability. It requires the courage to be seen as you are, not as you wish to appear. And that's terrifying. Because when we're truly seen, we risk being truly rejected. Lewis wrestled with this deeply. In his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, he reflects on how he hid himself behind intellect and wit. He was brilliant, but guarded, articulate, but emotionally distant. It wasn't until he encountered people, like J.R.R. Tolkien, who engaged him not just as a thinker but as a soul, that he began to open. And even then, slowly, painfully. True communion broke through his defenses, not through argument, but through presence, through shared grief, shared wonder, shared longing for something beyond this world. Loneliness, in its most honest form, reveals what kind of connection we really crave. Not just someone to talk to, but someone who sees us. Not just an echo chamber, but a mirror. Not just proximity, but presence. And here's the paradox. The more we try to avoid loneliness, the more we deepen it. Because every distraction delays the encounter. Every mask delays the healing. Every performance delays the real relationship we hunger for. That's why Lewis believed that pain was a gift, because it disrupts the illusion. It interrupts the show. It cracks the shell we've built around our hearts. It doesn't feel like grace, but it is, because it makes us ask the deeper question. What kind of life am I living? Who truly knows me? And more frightening, do I even know myself? The journey from loneliness to communion requires something radical: honesty. The kind of honesty that says, I'm not okay, and I don't want to pretend anymore. The kind that stops chasing crowds and starts seeking souls. The kind that steps out of the algorithm and into the mystery. Communion begins not with fixing others, but with exposing ourselves to God. With saying, here I am in all my ache, my need, my mess. And allowing ourselves to be met there, not by judgment, but by presence. Because God does not meet us where we pretend to be. He meets us where we actually are, in the pain, in the longing, in the places we'd rather hide. And when we allow Him to meet us there, something begins to shift. We become less afraid of being known. We become less defensive, less addicted to appearance, less allergic to silence. We become more available. To God, to others, to our own soul. We begin to cultivate communion, not just with people, but with the sacred. In a world that confuses connection with communion, we are invited to something deeper, something slower, something infinitely more real. Not surface, not noise, but soul. And it begins with one courageous decision: to stop running from the loneliness and start listening to what it's trying to reveal. In the next chapter, we'll explore how Lewis saw loneliness not just as emotional pain, but as a spiritual pathway, a kind of sacred invitation into the presence of a God who is often silent, but never absent. Loneliness, when seen only through the lens of emotion, feels like abandonment. But when we allow our soul to speak through the silence, something ancient begins to stir, something sacred. What if loneliness is not the absence of God, but the place where He waits for us most patiently? What if the silence isn't empty, but full of invitation? C.S. Lewis believed that the ache of loneliness was not just psychological, it was theological. That deep inside the human spirit, beneath the need for attention, approval, or romance, lives a yearning for eternal communion. He called this longing joy, not pleasure, not happiness, but a spiritual homesickness for something beyond time. And loneliness, in its rawest form, is the signal that we are still longing, still reaching, still human. In The Problem of Pain, Lewis suggests that suffering, and by extension loneliness, is one of the few things strong enough to pull us away from illusion and into reality. When life is pleasant, we forget our need. When we're surrounded by comfort, we stop seeking God. But when we're lonely, truly lonely, our illusions collapse. And in that collapse, the soul becomes open, vulnerable, desperate, ready. This is not weakness, this is sacred space. Think of Moses in the wilderness, Elijah under the broom tree, David in the cave, even Jesus in Gethsemane. Again and again, the scriptures reveal this pattern. Isolation precedes revelation. God often speaks clearest when everything else has gone quiet. Not because He enjoys our pain, but because it's in the silence that we finally stop performing, stop distracting, stop controlling, and we begin, slowly, to listen. Lewis knew this well. After the death of his beloved wife, Joy, he found himself plunged into a kind of darkness that no theology could fix. He wrote, "A grief observed not as a book, but as a journal, raw, angry, confused." And yet, even in his questioning, even in his despair, he returned again and again to this truth. God may be silent, but He is not absent. His presence is not always felt, but it is never withdrawn. There is a kind of knowing that only comes through loneliness, a knowing that is not intellectual, but experiential. The soul comes to learn that presence is more than proximity, that love is more than sensation, that God is not just the one who answers, but the one who remains. Loneliness teaches us to see differently. When all external voices fade, we begin to recognize the voice that has always been speaking, not in thunder, but in whisper, not in spectacle, but in stillness. As Lewis said, God shouts in our pain, but perhaps He also whispers in our loneliness, not to explain it, but to enter it. What does that mean practically? It means we stop asking, how do I escape this? And start asking, what is this silence showing me? It means we stop treating our solitude as a problem to solve and start treating it as a sanctuary. It means we sit with our ache, not to feed it, but to follow it. Because if you trace your loneliness all the way down, you may find that it points to the very heart of God. The longing to be known is not separate from your spirituality. It is your spirituality. You were made for communion. And the ache you feel is not shameful. It is sacred. It's the echo of Eden, the memory of a garden where we once walked with God without fear, without shame, without hiding. Lewis reminds us, if we feel like strangers here, perhaps it's because this is not our home. And in that light, loneliness becomes something holy, not because it's easy, not because it feels good, but because it awakens in us the deepest truth. We were made for more than this world can offer. We were made for communion with the eternal. And here's the miracle. The more we allow God to meet us in our loneliness, the less power it holds over us. We stop fearing the silence. We stop resisting the ache, because we begin to trust, not in ourselves, but in the one who meets us there. We realize that even when we are alone, we are never truly alone. Even when we feel abandoned, we are still being held. This does not mean we stop grieving. It does not mean we deny our need for human relationship. But it means that our emptiness is not final. It is a threshold, a doorway, a place where heaven touches earth, not in loud declarations, but in quiet presence. In the next part, we'll explore how loneliness becomes not only a place of personal transformation, but also the soil where compassion and deep relationships grow. Because once we've met God in our solitude, we're finally ready to meet others, not as saviors or projects, but as fellow pilgrims longing just like us. Once we allow loneliness to reveal its hidden meaning, something in us softens, something opens, not just toward God, but toward others. Because when you've sat with your own silence long enough, you begin to hear the silence in other people. When you've ached with longing for connection, you start to recognize that ache in every soul you meet. Loneliness humbles us, and in that humility, love is born. We tend to think of loneliness as something to escape before we're useful again. But what if it's in your loneliness that your most human qualities are formed? Tenderness, patience, presence. These do not come from a busy life or from always being surrounded by people. They are born in the quiet places, in the waiting, in the absence, because when you have nothing to offer but yourself, you learn how sacred that offering truly is. C.S. Lewis understood that the way we relate to others is deeply shaped by how we have suffered. Those who deny their pain often remain shallow in love. But those who have faced the ache, who have been stripped down, emptied out, left alone with their doubts, emerge with a new kind of depth. They are no longer interested in performance. They are not addicted to being right. They have lost the need to impress, because they have learned that the soul is not nourished by admiration, but by presence. In The Four Loves, Lewis explores the difference between affection, friendship, eros, and charity. He reminds us that real friendship is not built on convenience, but on a shared journey toward truth. That the deepest love, agape, is not self-seeking, but self-giving. And here's the irony. It is often through loneliness that we are prepared to love like this, because loneliness teaches us what superficiality cannot sustain. It teaches us how to stay, how to see, how to be with someone, not to fix them, but to witness them. Think of the people you trust most in life. Chances are, they're not the ones who always had the answers. They're the ones who didn't run from your pain, the ones who didn't try to rush your healing, the ones who sat beside you when there was nothing left to say. These people are formed in the crucible of loneliness. They know the terrain, they've walked it, and because of that, they carry something holy, compassion without condition. When we avoid loneliness at all costs, we remain relationally shallow. We become people who fear vulnerability, who demand constant stimulation, who confuse validation with intimacy. But when we embrace loneliness as a sacred teacher, we become the kind of people who make others feel safe, seen, understood. Lewis never claimed that loneliness was good in itself, but he believed that what it produces, if we let it, is good beyond words. He saw that our culture avoids discomfort, and in doing so, forfeits depth. We want quick friendships, fast intimacy, instant trust, but the soul doesn't work like that. The heart doesn't open on command. Real relationships require interior space, and loneliness clears that space, painfully, but purposefully. One of the quietest miracles of the spiritual life is this. The more we allow ourselves to be loved by God in our solitude, the more capable we become of loving others in theirs. We stop needing people to complete us. We stop manipulating connection to avoid our own emptiness. We begin to love from fullness, not from fear. This is where transformation happens. Not when the loneliness ends, but when it deepens into presence. You stop asking, "When will I be loved?" and start asking, "How can I become love?" You stop needing to be rescued and start becoming someone others feel safe with. You become someone who holds space for silence, for sadness, for realness. And in that space, people begin to heal. This is the kind of community our world aches for. Not one built on hype or noise, but on honesty and grace. And you don't need to be perfect to build it. You just need to be present. You just need to be real. You just need to remember what it felt like to be alone, and refuse to let the next person suffer there in silence. In the final chapter of this journey, we will explore how Lewis invites us not only to endure loneliness, but to transform it into spiritual clarity. Because ultimately, the ache we feel is not meaningless. It is a signpost, a sacred fire, and if we follow it faithfully, it leads us home. There comes a moment in every honest spiritual journey when we stop asking, "How do I get out of this loneliness?" and begin asking, "What is this loneliness pointing me toward?" That question changes everything, because it transforms suffering from an obstacle into an opening. And that's the quiet revolution of C.S. Lewis's life and thought, not that he escaped pain, but that he allowed pain to reveal something eternal. Loneliness, he believed, was not a dead end. It was a summons, a sacred calling, not to despair but to desire, not to numb the ache, but to follow it. Because deep down, loneliness is never really about the absence of people. It's about the absence of something more fundamental, belonging. And that longing, however sharp, however painful, is a mirror. It reflects that you were made to belong not just to someone, but to someone. Not just in time, but in eternity. Lewis often returned to the idea that all the beauty we taste here, all the love, all the laughter, all the fleeting moments of connection, are not the feast, but the fragrance. They are echoes of a deeper reality. We are, he wrote, so little reconciled to time that we are even astonished at it. How like a dream is this world that fades even as we grasp it. That ache you feel when something beautiful ends, that sting of loss, is not weakness. It is memory, not of something past, but of something future. It is the soul remembering what it was made for, and longing to return. This is why the purpose of loneliness is not to break you. It is to reorient you, to strip away every false source of identity, every illusion of self-sufficiency, every cheap substitute for love, and lead you to the only place where your soul can truly rest, the presence of God. Not the idea of God, not a spiritual concept, but the living, breathing, unshakable presence of the one who made you. And here's the miracle Lewis discovered. God does not wait for you on the other side of loneliness. He meets you inside it. He does not demand that you be whole before he draws near. He enters your ache. He inhabits your silence. He walks with you through the long night, not with thunder, but with presence. Not to remove your pain, but to redeem it. The cross itself is the ultimate symbol of sacred loneliness. Christ, abandoned, betrayed, isolated. Not because God had failed, but because love went to the very depths of our suffering to transform it from within. And when you realize that even Jesus knew the pain of, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" then you know you are not alone in your loneliness. You are accompanied by the one who refused to escape it. From that place of sacred recognition, something begins to shift. The fear starts to fade. The shame loses its grip. You begin to see that this loneliness, painful as it is not the end of your story. It's a passage, a refining fire, a holy desert. And on the other side is not just comfort, but clarity. Not just relief, but revelation. Clarity that your worth is not defined by your relationships. Clarity that silence is not emptiness, it is invitation. Clarity that what you most desire is not another distraction, but a home. And that home is not found in this world, it is glimpsed through it. You begin to recognize that your most sacred moments were not the ones when everything was going right, but the ones when everything was falling apart. And still, somehow, you knew you were held. You remember the nights you wept and felt no answers, but later saw that those tears softened your soul. You recall the seasons when you were invisible to others, but known deeply by God. That is the gift of loneliness. It burns away the false and reveals the real. It exposes the need and makes space for grace. It breaks the illusion of control and opens the door to surrender. And in that surrender, you are not defeated. You are finally free. Lewis never promised that loneliness would disappear, but he promised that it could be transformed, that the ache could become a compass, that the silence could become a sanctuary, that the longing could become a song that reminds you of who you are and where you're going. Because in the end, you were not made to be endlessly connected. You were made to be fully known, not just by people, but by God. And through Him, you begin to see that even your loneliness carries a message. You are not home yet, but you are on the way, and you are never alone in the journey.